Hip-hop is in great shape here in 2025, and the latest album from Atlanta rapper JID, God Does Like Ugly, is a perfect example of why. Released on August 8th, 2025, this is the long-awaited follow-up to JID's 2022 magnum opus masterpiece, The Forever Story, which is widely regarded not just as one of the best hip-hop albums of the 2020s, but one of the best albums regardless of genre from the entire decade. Today, I'm taking a deep dive on this follow-up record from JID, and I'm going to get into why I think it does not quite match up to The Forever Story, but it is still a solid effort. A little bit of background on JID. He's been grinding since the early 2010s after kind of flirting with a career as a football player. He had some success in college football, but he did eventually take a step back to pursue music. He was kind of a mixtape rapper in the first half of the 2010s, releasing a few projects here and there, but it was the second half of the 2010s that really did see JID break out. In early 2017, he signed a contract with J. Cole's Dreamville Records. From there, he wasted no time, dropping two very solid albums, 2017's The Never Story and 2018's DiCaprio 2. So by the time that the Dreamville deal came around, JID was a little bit older than a lot of breakout artists, already in his late 20s. Perhaps this is due to the fact that he was pursuing his education and a career possibly as a football player. Regardless of why, I could tell there was something special about JID from those first two records. And while it was obvious that on those records there was room for improvement, to me it was not a question of if he was going to break out and hit the next level, but when. After a few more high-profile guest appearances in the late 2010s and 2020s as he established himself on the Dreamville roster, JID was ready by 2022 to drop the sequel to his first album, The Never Story, and with Dreamville backing him once again, he dropped the modern-day masterpiece, The Forever Story, in August of 2022. The album saw JID come of age as a person in front of the entire world with some excellent storytelling, self-reflection, social commentary, and extremely technical rapping over an hour of next-level soundscapes and production. The Forever Story was obviously a life-changing album for JID. It was a game-changing album for modern hip-hop. So needless to say, the expectations following an album like The Forever Story were sky high for JID, who was suddenly, following the album's release, in the conversation among the modern titans of hip-hop. It took him 3 years to deliver his follow-up. That's not really a surprise given the lofty expectations set by The Forever Story. Judging by the posts on some of his socials leading up to the release of God Does Like Ugly, the success, the expectations following The Forever Story were at the forefront of his mind. So God Does Like Ugly, it's another ambitious effort that sees JID putting his cerebral delivery and writing style to the test. But this time he takes the album off on some stylistic tangents which unfortunately do hold it back a bit. He did this a little bit on The Forever Story, but he did it in a more tasteful way. It came off a lot differently than it does here, but there are enough shades of the JID that we know and have grown to love in the past few years to make this a decent follow-up to his magnum opus. One of the big takeaways on God Does Like Ugly is the guest appearances. He really loads up on some high-profile names here, which actually do give this album some serious legs. The first voice you hear on this album is kind of an unlikely one, that of Westside Gunn from Buffalo, New York, and Griselda. Kind of a whole different region and a whole different type of subject matter. So Westside Gunn comes in, he immediately gives us some of his iconic ad-libs before JID comes in over this punchy, bass-heavy beat and sets the stage that he knows that he around and set a serious standard for himself, and he's here to rap like it. This is the opening track, You Ugly. It is split into two different moods. There's kind of a soulful, mellow passage in the middle, and it's bookended by JID coming out swinging in between Westside Gunn's contributions. JID immediately sets the stage that, much like The Forever Story, this is going to be stylistically diverse, which is something that made that album as great as it was. The second track, Glory, is one of the highlights of the album as he expands on his patented mix of conscious and clever bars. He delivers this over another soulful, this time gospel-leaning sample, which is an actual recording of a gospel choir. Producers Beatnik D and Lex Luger actually chop the vocal recording of the choir and kind of change the pitch and make it really sound cool and unique as the song progresses. Glory touches a bit more on some Christian themes and how religion plays such an integral role in the life of African Americans in the South, and how this can sometimes be sort of a stark juxtaposition to the higher crime rates in the region, and JID along the way alludes to his brother's incarceration. Kind of a note here is that there's some fairly prominent religious and spiritual undertones throughout this album. Work is the third track and the album's leading single that admittedly did not really grab me that much when it came out in the spring of 2025, but I will say it has admittedly grown on me. It has this undeniably heavy bass line being dropped over a simple but effective hi-hat from producers Plus and Christo. JID shows off his rapid-fire chops here perfectly, and after hearing the rest of the album, it makes a lot of sense that Work was picked as the lead single, as it has some undeniable energy. The guest appearances continue to manifest themselves on the fourth track, Communities, as we get an appearance from none other than Clipse, fresh off of their show-stopping comeback album Let God Sort 'Em Out, which dropped less than a month before. We get an incredibly cold, menacing appearance from both Pusha T and Malice. JID actually kicks things off with the first verse, which starts with this kind of like down-pitched, almost chopped and screwed type delivery, before all of a sudden he goes into this very unfamiliar, aggressive delivery, which doesn't sound anything like JID. I had to go back and make sure that it was actually him, but it seems like he's trying to match the flow and the style of Pusha T and Malice. The song has some of the more serious subject material on the album as the trio speak about growing up in public housing and the impact that it had on them as people. The fifth track, G's, kind of takes a step back as Communities is kind of a hard track to follow up. It's one of the big highlights of the album. It's hard to keep the listener's attention after that. I see the song G's, despite a cool beat, as more of a palate cleanser before the sixth track, VCR, which features yet another high-profile guest appearance, this time from Vince Staples. JID includes a bar on this verse reminding the listener that he's not successful because of his proximity to J. Cole, but because he knows in his mind that he's a dope-ass rapper. He steps for a second outside of that normally humble, relatable personality, lets you know that he knows he's no stranger to the game and he can rap with the best of them. It's kind of a refreshing change, honestly. There's this tentative, anxious guitar loop that's provided by producer Jay Versace. It really fits the back and forth action between Vince Staples and JID pretty well. VCR, definitely one of the stronger tracks on the album. So now it's at this point that the album shifts to this more kind of accessible, playful direction, which ultimately ends up in some heavily based soul and R&B songs. For better or for worse, those songs will end up changing the trajectory of this album, but the song Skate is this catchy, almost like freestyle music type track that brings in fellow Dreamville label mates and co-founders of the Spillage Village collective Earth Gang, as well as singer Ciara for a guest appearance. It's a fun, enjoyable track. It kind of closes out the album's first half because on the next track, What We On, things go in a different direction as Don Tolliver is brought in for a guest appearance here. What We On is a more down-tempo, accessible track that honestly, it starts to feel a little bit awkward in the context of the album so far. It's okay to have slower moments, but this thing kind of just totally changes up the momentum that existed to this point. It's not a bad song and features some decent melodic musical undertones, but it's here that I sort of noticed that for the first time that I think JID is almost trying too hard to replicate the sonic diversity from the Forever Story. It's not really the most refreshing thing. It seems a little bit out of place. This continues on the album's ninth track, Wholeheartedly, as we get a Ty Dolla $ign guest appearance. It's another mellow, soulful track that's well produced, but the song again comes off awkward after how quick, bouncy, and aggressive the album started. So by this time, we're about 2/3 of the way through the track list. Okay, I'm ready to bring back that aggression, that energy from the first half of the record. Let's go, let's bring it back. But instead, we get the song No Boo, which is this super accessible R&B type jam where JID raps about the opposite sex, which doesn't bother me. But there's a guest feature from a singer by the name of Jessie Reyes, which I was not a fan of. There's this part 2/3 of the way through the album where they kind of like rap and sing together in Spanish. It's just one of the most cringy moments I've ever heard in JID's discography. I know what JID's capable of. This is kind of him almost making a commercial concession here, and it's just awkward and it just isn't good. And there were no moments like that really on his previous projects where I listened to it and I was like, wow, this kind of borderline sucks. But whatever, there's a quick interlude. Things kind of get back on track with the 12th track on McAfee that brings back a strong southern flavor. It gets back some of that aggressive demeanor. There's a driving, nefarious beat from industry vet Boy Wanda. It's here on this track that we get back the JID that we know and love, and on this track he finds a creative way to rap about hood politics and street justice. We get fast rapping JID back to I love fast rapping JID, so it is a welcome switch. So as quick as that happens, things get mellow once again, but this time they are executed nearly perfectly on this song Of Blue, which brings in a singer by the name of Mariba, who sets the tone in the first of 3 passages with this beautiful, heartfelt, melodic piece. The second passage of what will ultimately be a 7-minute song shows JID getting into some deep storytelling of a character who's dealing with some real demons, who's deeply flawed, who's dealing with some obstacles on a quest for greater spiritual peace. The song then heads into its third and final movement as JID switches it up again, touching on the nuances and hypocrisies of religion and kind of some fake former friends at the same time, and how so much of life is driven by sin or the avoidance of being a sinner. I mentioned the underlying religious theme throughout this album, and while it's not inherently critical or opposing religion or Christianity, it's kind of a neutral and observational take that JID has. And as he gets a little bit older and wiser on this album, he's now I think about 35 years old, it's interesting to see his perspective and see what he has to say. Either way, Of Blue is the deepest track on this entire album. It really shows that introspective side of JID that really set himself apart from his counterparts on previous releases. The album begins to wrap up with the song K-Word, which touches on the concept of karma, and we get a guest appearance on the hook from Atlanta veteran rapper Pastor Troy, who back in his day could combine spirituality and deep Christian themes with this hardcore, almost violent street rap like nobody else. The juxtaposition and honestly some of the hypocrisy in Pastor Troy's early stuff definitely made him unique and stand out, for better or for worse. We get another dramatic voice switch between verses from JID on this song. We saw this back on Communities alongside Clipse. He does it again here. Once again, I had to go back and ask myself, is that actually JID rapping? And when the album came out on streaming, it did not include the guests that were on the track. I think JID kind of wanted people to focus on each track for itself and not jump to the Clipse or the Vince Staples or the Pastor Troy features. But he spit some personal experiences and clever bars, again dealing with the subject of karma. He does it over an atmospheric, ethereal, and hardcore beat. Just a quick note about the pitch switching, that is something that Kendrick Lamar does very well, and it's kind of nice to see JID borrow a page out of the most successful and influential rapper of the 21st century. The album finishes out with the track For Keeps, which brings in this upbeat, chopped soul sample, where JID decides to reflect on his career and his perspective on his own success, but he doesn't do it from a point where he's bragging and boasting. He shows humility. He actually thanks his fan base. It's a refreshing, extremely positive way to close out an album that's had quite a different range of moods and emotions. And I think that's what makes JID's fourth album, God Does Like Ugly, so unique and special in its own right. JID takes us on this journey from aggressive, cold, ruthless, energetic, all the way to relaxing, down-tempo, and accessible, back to spiritual, introspective, and reflective to close the record out. This is a big takeaway that I had from the Forever story. JID was very diverse as a songwriter, as a rapper, as a storyteller, and he does the same thing on this record. As wide-ranging and diverse as it is, God Does Like Ugly also does really suffer from a drop in quality and consistency in the middle. I feel like so many albums do this. They come out of the gate, the artist sequences it to kind of show their best qualities out of the gate, and then they go try and do something different, which I appreciate. I appreciate the sonic diversity, but sometimes it lulls in the middle, comes back strong at the end. That's the exact formula that happens here on God Does Like Ugly. That's the difference from this album and the Forever story, is there's never that drop off in quality in the Forever story. He does go off on some more R&B, contemporary R&B type tendencies on that album, but there's never a drop in quality, but there is here, and it's very stark and noticeable. Songs like What We On and No Boo, I thought that JID was really stretching and trying way too hard to sound different here, and it just didn't work. I appreciate he's trying not to make the same album 2 times in a row, but at the same time, had he stuck to those formulas from the Forever story, that wouldn't have been such a bad thing since that album was such a masterpiece. But I get why he did what he did. The overall verdict, God Does Like Ugly, is a good, solid album that does not live up to the hype from the Forever story. It should be taken seriously as a part of his catalog. He did a pretty decent job with his follow-up. A lot of artists would have fallen off completely and just cracked under pressure. JID does not do that here. But it is probably going to forever live in the shadows of the Forever story, partially because he was trying to make this album sound so different and unique. He was trying to take things to the next level. He experimented with new things and sounds, which I appreciate big time, but he kind of strayed a little bit too far from the formulas that worked last time around. I understand why he did it. It's a natural next step artistically, but it does not fully click for me. That's why I'm giving God Does Like Ugly a B- or an 80 to 82 numerically. What are your thoughts on God Does Like Ugly? How does it compare to the rest of his catalog for you? If you're new to JID, what do you think off the bat? If you're not comparing it to the Forever story, how do you like this album? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, I appreciate your guys' viewership and support, and I'll see you in the next one.